I'm Primal Piggy. Thank you for joining me for another BDSM United podcast. How do you know if you're a little? This question is a tricky one to answer, and in all honesty, I could just say that you either know or you don't, but that doesn't really help you if you're here. If you're uh, listening to this podcast and you're trying to figure out where you fit in the BDSM lifestyle. This community can often be a puzzle that you have to kind of put together. And you know, while oftentimes we have clues about whether we're dominant or submissive, um, actually being knowing whether you're a little or not is is oftentimes a little more difficult to figure out. A little, first off, is not someone who wants to dress up and act like a child or an infant, as is the case with age players. Age play is a kink that is a type of role play, and age play can be acting or role playing an age that is either older than yourself, but oftentimes it is playing a age in a scene that is younger than who you are. The line between age players and littles can be a very fine line, and it can sometimes be blurred, especially if someone enjoys the kink of age play but has the identity of a little. And at first glance, most people confuse the two, but littles don't act a part. They live it. It's not a role that they're playing. It's an identity. So, what is a little? Well, little are people with the unique ability to either regress or to retain a childlike personality or nature. As with all BDSM, they're adults. They are always adults all the time. You can't change your age literally. If you are a part of BDSM, you are 18 plus, you're an adult. But their inner littles are a part of who they are, and it's not an act. It isn't a case of regressing, oftentimes. As you'll hear some express on the internet, an inner little is often a permanent part of their personality. It's always there. They can oftentimes suppress their little urges and desires when they need to, but doing that often makes them very unhappy, sometimes short tempered, sometimes kind of a bitch to be around. Some littles may experience regression, some maybe not. Just because you don't regress doesn't mean that you aren't a little. And likewise, just because you don't like or do the same things that you see other littles in the BDSM lifestyle do, doesn't mean that you aren't a little. So, what are some characteristics of a little? This is going to be a difficult list to put together because each little, just like each daddy or mommy, is different. And while there may be things here that don't apply to you as a little, there are some that aren't here that do. So these are just a few ideas of little type of characteristics. Childlike, and not to be confused with childish and bratty. Being childlike means that you see the world differently. Maybe you're more innocent and naive than others your own age. Maybe you enjoy things that are considered child's play and not suitable for a grown up. You may be able to identify with children better than grown ups at times vanilla, in vanilla things. Even as a young child, perhaps you played easier with girls or boys that were younger than you. whatever being childlike means to you, this is a key characteristic of a little. Oftentimes, littles will have a love for stuffies. I have yet to come across a little on the internet who doesn't love stuffies. That's not to say that you have to love every single stuffy out there, but a love for fuzzy, cuddly stuffies in general is a characteristic of most littles. Personally, I love stuffies, and I enjoy that my little in my dynamic has a moderate collection. Well, she used to have a moderate collection, but she says that I have a habit of or an addiction to buying her stuffies. And maybe she's right. um, you know, I don't know. Uh, Again, I don't know very many littles who don't like stuffies or stuffed animals or stuffed dolls or anything fuzzy and snuggly. Cartoons, animation, coloring. Watching cartoons is often relegated solely to children, with grown-ups preferring dramas or reality shows or whatever else. Most littles love to watch their fair share of cartoons or animated movies or anime. Um, Oftentimes they're not necessarily fans of little kids cartoons, but oftentimes they like cartoons that are a little more older, or like a Family Guy or Brick and Morty. And oftentimes they may love manga or anime as well. Littles are often very fond of coloring and other creative tasks that most grown-ups do and call arts and crafts or painting and doodling. Oftentimes they like bright colors or drawing. Um, they often also like coloring and making things digitally. They may like to design blogs or create websites. They oftentimes buy coloring books in bulk and must always have freshly sharpened pack of crayons or markers or colored pencils in all the colors nearby. To my little, coloring is just a very soothing and relaxing activity. Littles may or may not have a hard time dealing with the adult world from a grown up perspective. They are adults. They're always going to be adults, but responsibility, sticking to a strict schedule on their own without supervision, perhaps a lack of self discipline, and many other aspects of living as a grown up can get a little down. Without a daddy by their side, his caring, physical, and emotional protection, and his help with dealing in the world, oftentimes a little can become depressed and not a very nice person to be around at all. Simply put, most littles just don't feel like they're cut out to be a grown up in every aspect of their life and their being. And nobody but daddy seems to understand that about them. He's the only one who seems to understand that in order to be their best self and truly flourish and enjoy life, they need to be able to freely indulge in little urges and desires. They need someone to hold their hand sometimes when the grown up world becomes too much to handle on their own. Oftentimes, they've tried adulting and they just don't recommend it. This isn't to say that they're completely incapable of being a grown up where and when it counts. Oftentimes, their grown up and little self are integrated into one personality. They work, they do chores, and they do housework. They look after any of their children that they have. and they do lots of other things that are expected of grown-ups, but sometimes they can be very forgetful or absent-minded, easily distracted, have trouble concentrating on one thing for long, and would simply much rather throw all the responsibilities aside, watch some anime or a cartoon, do some creative things, or play video games. Emotionally, you would think that littles deal with and experience emotions a little differently to other grown-ups. Oftentimes, they're easy to cheer up if they're upset or angry, but they also get angry or upset very quickly. Sometimes they get very excited over little things, and so excited over the big things that it can uh, be overwhelming. Oftentimes, it's like their emotions are not as reined in and controlled as some other adults out there. And they seem to also, a lot of times, be a lot more sensitive to situations and stimuli, things such as teasing or surprises, arguments, conflict, etc. Having a different way of thinking and not being emotionally up to par with the rest of the world doesn't mean that being a little means that you have a mental or any kind of emotional handicap. It just means that you think and you experience things differently and in a more childlike way for an adult. And as always, people who are littles are submissives. They're part of they have a little personality. They're submissives in a power exchange relationship or seeking a power exchange relationship or would normally be part of a power exchange relationship with a daddy or a mommy dominant. And so the type of power exchange relationship that they would be in would be daddy and little or mommy and little, and a little could be a person of any gender or any sexual identity or any gender expression. And so there are not limits placed on who is a little other than littles are under the submissive under the umbrella of submissives, and and daddies and mommies are under the umbrella of dominance. And in just like I said in a previous podcast when I was talking about daddy doms, if we look to our old guard history, and we call them old guard, they obviously didn't call themselves that, but if we look back at the very beginning, littles existed from the very beginning. They were often referred under the pet name of boy, and they would gravitate towards a daddy figure or a daddy dominant figure who would guide them through their journey with S&M or BDSM. And it was oftentimes they were people who had reached puberty, were on the threshold of adulthood, and they were young adults who were getting into exploring their kinks, their fetishes, and their sexuality. Oftentimes, they were estranged from their natural family, and they had to seek the comfort and in a more chosen family. And so, as they were guided in their journey with kink and BDSM and in their sexuality, they would they were little boys in the lifestyle. Always adults, always 18 plus, but they were under the heading of little boy. I'm Primal Picky. Thank you for joining me for this BDSM United podcast, where we help you figure out if your identity, your submissive identity, falls under the umbrella or under the personality of a little. You can find all of our resources at www.bdsmunited.com. It was a joy bringing this subject to you. It's near and dear to me because I'm in a relationship with a submissive who has a little personality. And so, in my own personal relationship dynamic, this is very relevant to us. And it was a joy talking with you about this subject. And I'll talk with you again really soon. Thanks for listening.